Hello, everybody. My name's Thomas Fracken, and this is the Roundtable Chats podcast, episode 10. I'm here with my friend Matt Scott. Matt is the founder of
Hey,
180 Degrees of Impact, and he's the manager of storytelling engagement at Second Muse. Matt, welcome to the Roundtable.
hey, thanks for the introduction, Thomas. I'm glad I could be part of it. And I didn't realize I would be number 10. It's a major milestone. So it's a huge honor for me to be uh, conversation number 10 as part of your roundtable chats. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. No, my pleasure. So let's just dive into it. What are you grateful for?
Okay, that's that's a huge question, and that's tough. That I was actually thinking about that a lot before, obviously being familiar with your other conversations, and um, a lot of things came to mind and people came to mind. But overall, I would say I'm really thankful for just love in general, in the sense that um, like there's so much love and I don't feel like I give it enough time or attention and recognition, but like, my family, like my mom, for instance, and my siblings, like the people who are always there for you. I'm really grateful for them and all that they've been for me my whole life, and even love for my dad before he passed away. Like all that love is something I still carry. And then there's the love from people who you don't expect. Like I feel like like sometimes you go to an event, or in the case of like my trip to LA recently, I ended up sitting on a plane next to someone who ended up being my mentor at the training that I attended. And we had like an awesome 2.5 hour conversation. I didn't know anyone at the training going into it. I didn't know what to expect. And like that much like love and time and care was something that I appreciated. So like I'm really grateful for that. And then just something I'm trying to learn more of is self-love, and trying to like, make time for myself and have self-compassion and self-care. And so, yeah, I think love sums it up in a bunch of different ways, mostly because it's kind of cheating. Like it covers a lot of different ground.
Yeah.
I totally cheated on that question, but I
No,
hope
no.
you don't judge me too much.
Definitely not. Definitely not. No, it's funny you're talking about the love you felt when you're on the airplane. I've been thinking like that's one of my favorite places to have conversations, and to write as well, where it's like
Yeah.
you don't have any distractions. It's almost like you're away from the world and like even in a different dimension. And there's nothing else you can do, especially if you don't have
Yeah.
Wi-Fi or anything. And so you can really get to know somebody. I think going back to December, I learned things about my dad, who's like 70
Yeah.
now, that I had never learned before when we were just on an airplane together,
Oh,
and just having a conversation. So you just gave me an idea. I mean, I won't be able to really do it, but if I could do, my podcast on an airplane, that would be that would be ideal.
it's funny. I was actually thinking about that because, like you mentioned, 180 degrees of impact, and
Yeah.
I, I went to this training in Los Angeles for the Climate Reality Project, which is this thing by Al Gore that he has done for several years, where he has now like mobilized 17,000 people as climate reality leaders. And
Mm.
so, I was flying to LA and I was having this conversation, and I was thinking to myself midway, like, why am I not recording this for 180 degrees of impact?
Right.
And then I also just started that as like a podcast. So some of the episodes or some of the conversations that I've had for 180 degrees of impact are now in the podcast app. I actually need to edit and put another one up today. So yeah, it's funny that you say that, because I ended up recording some stuff while I was on the plane out of LA
Mhm.
that I could hopefully put on their podcast. And I don't know, it's cool. I think it's awesome. There's a lot of sound and noises and things going on a plane that would probably make for a really interesting roundtable chat.
True.
Like a lot of like, sometimes babies crying, so that's not the best, but like
No.
all of like the flight announcements and everything, I think are just nice ambient noise when you're on a plane, if you ask me.
Yeah, it could make like nice little breaks in the
Yeah.
conversation, for sure. Yeah, maybe you have to be like a private jet or something. I don't know.
Oh, yeah. I mean, on a commercial flight, it's fine as long as no one complains. And I don't know. I will say when I was recording on my flight out of LA, again, just kind of recording some stuff about the training that hopefully I could put out as a bonus episode on the podcast or something. I'll figure
Mhm.
out what to do. But, it was while we were still on the tarmac. So I very well could have been on the phone, which is an acceptable thing to be doing on the
Right.
plane. Otherwise, I think, yeah, I don't know if you could get away with recording a full podcast without people kind of calling the flight attendant over.
Like what's going on? Yeah, it's reminding me. I think on my fifth episode of mine, for such a long time I was trying to get this retired Army colonel to do a podcast with him. We're trying to find the right time to do it. I found him through LinkedIn, and when it finally the time was aligned, I was in a hostel in Richmond, Virginia, and
Mm.
there was no like quiet room for me to do it in, so I was just in the main lobby, and I just did the full podcast and interview. And so it always makes me cringe, but when you listen to it you can hear like doors slamming, or opening back and forth.
Right.
So one time you can hear, I think, a baby or like a little kid in the background briefly. But he was
Yeah.
like, he was a trooper. He was fine with it. I just felt bad because I'm like, oh, usually the other ones there's no disturbances, and I'm just sitting here in the lobby and making eye contact with people briefly and being like, don't say anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think I totally get that. Like the background noise adds character to it, but
Sure.
also like I think the only time I've done a 100, actually one of the only times I've done a 108 degrees of impact chat where there's background noise was with you, when there was like a cleaning person at GW who was walking through, and we were clearly recording, and she was like slamming trash cans and everything. She had to do her job. I can't fault her, but yeah, it adds character, and I think it just makes it like maybe it's on like a more serious note, but it just makes it more human when there are those like mistakes or mess ups or just funny awkward moments that pop up.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's true. Yeah, so I just want to get to know more about your origin story. Like, who is Matt
Yeah.
Scott? I know you've had an incredibly interesting life, and so yeah, I'd just love to dive more into the beginning.
I know. Where do you think I should start? How early are we talking?
Wherever you want, whatever you think is relevant.
uh, well, wow, okay, my head went right all the way back to like my birth,
The birth,
and
yeah, the inception.
the hospital, but I think that might be a little bit too far back. So, you know what? I'm from like West Orange, New Jersey, which is in northern New Jersey, not too far from New York City, and West Orange is apparently where Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. Fun fact. But I tell people that, and a lot of them dispute it for some reason. Either way, we have the Thomas Edison Museum in town, so
Okay.
that's one of the claims to fame for West Orange. But I kind of grew up in this place that now I realize in retrospect was like pretty diverse in terms of like the different cultures that you would find mixing. So like, I'm not Catholic, but I went to Catholic school growing up because my parents were, they thought it was a great school experience. And I think it was like a really good experience. I'm glad they did that. And so there's a lot of like Irish Catholic people in West Orange, but then you also have a strong Jewish community. There's also like, and especially now, there's more of a Black community and Hispanic community, and you just have a lot of people mixing in West Orange and interacting. Where if you go to a lot of places, you might not see that interaction, and it's very casual and something that now I'm appreciating more, because it never really occurred to me like how diverse it actually was, because it just wasn't. It really wasn't an issue or something that really came up at the time. But I think a lot of that, I went from living in West Orange, going to school in West Orange before college, to around junior or senior year of high school, deciding I really wanted to go to school in DC. And so I like actually targeted GW, George Washington University, and I was like, okay, I want to go there. That's my top choice. And I went there for like a campus tour, and I absolutely loved it. I met one of my high school friends, like his dad, and I loved everything I heard about GW. I had like the little college pamphlets, and I loved everything that I saw about GW. And I went and stayed overnight with someone on Halloween weekend, and I loved GW. And I stayed in Thurston Hall, and it was like, this whole thing was like, I want to be at GW. I know this is what I want to do. I don't know exactly what I want to do with my time there, but I felt like GW offered me, and DC offered me a lot of the, again, diversity and opportunities. So if I wanted to study psychology, I could do that if I really felt like that's something that I was passionate about. If I wanted to do journalism, I could do that if I was passionate about it. I ended up, pretty much last minute using business and then marketing within that. And so I went to DC, and I feel like the rest is history because I still live in DC. But I don't know. There's a lot of like twists and turns within my GW story and my story since then that I could dive into. I don't really know where the best place to start is. There are a lot of details.
Okay. Maybe one approach we could take is like, how do you think change between like when you first went to GW your freshman year to when you came out, like in yourself, and then what you observed there as well?
That's really interesting. So when I first got to GW, I think I just felt like a fish out of water. Like for me, I didn't really, I didn't feel comfortable in the college environment. I knew that this would be something new for me. I'd never like really lived away from home in any sense or away from family in any sense. So it's not like I knew that I didn't want to stay in my comfort zone, but I totally also recognized that I was diving way out of my comfort zone and going to GW. And I think in my head, I had this idea of, not a clear idea, but this idea of what I could do and what I could accomplish. Like before college, I hadn't really had too many leadership roles, or I wasn't like an outgoing or popular person in any sense or anything like that. Not that that's anything I ever really strived for, but I really wanted to be able to just like grab onto things that I was passionate about. And so then going into GW, there was that weird adjustment phase where like you have all of your classes, but you're also trying to establish your social life and you make friends and also do student organizations. But then also like every day you have to figure out what to eat. So like for me on my freshman year, I'm like eating Wendy's and like pizza and 7-Eleven every day. Like it's really a mess at the time. Now that I think back at it, think back to that. But, I feel like over time and this is kind of going back to the love, over time, I really found that there were a lot of people who, especially my freshman and sophomore years, when I was just still getting my footing, who were there for me, who helped me like figure things out and get comfortable. So, or maybe get more uncomfortable in some cases, if you know what I mean, but become comfortable at the end of the day. So like, for instance, the very first person I met was my, house proctor or my RA on my floor, Courtney. And she's still one of my best friends because we ended up bonding so much all my freshman year, and she ended up introducing me to a lot of the leadership roles and opportunities that I was interested in. And I would see her going out for things because I think she was a junior at the time, and I would express some interest in doing these things, or even if I wouldn't, she would tell me like, hey Matt, have you ever thought of applying to this? Have you ever thought of getting involved in this organization or that? And that led me to, again, getting out of my comfort zone, just kind of showing up and getting involved. And, while Courtney, I think, set a lot of those seeds, there were also a lot of other people who led me in different directions in my time at GW. So by the end of my freshman year, I was involved in Students Against Sexual Assault, which that end of my freshman year was spring 2011. The organization started about a year before at the time. It's still around now, and I think probably bigger than ever before, I would assume. But it's like my roommate freshman year was involved in Students Against Sexual Assault, and because one of his sister's friends had been sexually assaulted, and I got involved, and now, like, flash forward to the end of my GW career, I was like the president of that organization, and actually like leading a lot of the efforts on campus for this issue that, I mean, before I came to college, I had no clue what sexual assault was. I mean, even when I was still at college my freshman year, I didn't understand the definition of sexual assault, or the difference between like sexual assault and rape, and like all of this other stuff that I know now. And so there was that. There were a lot of other like leadership things and getting involved on campus, but really that was the one that stuck with me and resonated with me. And I think the way that ties in with my career now is that I realized my freshman year, thanks to Students Against Sexual Assault, that people could see all these facts and statistics posted all over campus. Like about 2 or 3 weeks into my freshman year, and I think they still do this every year pretty much, is that they have a statistics campaign where they put up a statistic about how common sexual assault is, or an aspect of it. By my senior year, I ended up, being part of putting on a few of these. And I remember the very first one going up, and the statistic was all over campus. And like very few people I knew would actually talk about it or engage with it. There was a point, of course, where, just to kind of give like you and anyone who's listening an idea of how the campaign would work.
Right.
Let's say the statistic is like 90%. 90% of, I think that's the statistic off the top of my head, but 90% of people who are sexually assaulted on a college campus know the perpetrator. Right? So we would put up 90% all over campus, just 90% without the context. And so when people are on campus, they see this 90% and they're like, what is that? What does 90% mean? Right. Especially freshmen who haven't been on campus look around and they're like, 90%? What's that? And then after about a week is when we would do the big reveal and replace those 90% posters with, the full statistic to give context. And so you have this build and this anticipation and interest and this question of what this means. And then there's the reveal so people understand. And, my freshman year, I remember that. And I remember the anticipation and the questions that people would ask. But I also remember that once it was revealed, like for me, I was in shock by the statistic that they used at the time. And I'm thinking, that's high. Like, for instance, on campuses now, I think the statistics are still 1 in 5 women and 1 in 16 men are sexually assaulted. And like, that's insane to me. Right. That's a lot of people. But people didn't care or react or engage in the way that they do now. And so that, I kind of was like outraged. How could we not do something about this thing that's clearly an epidemic? Right. So I think in a lot of ways that defined my my college experience in part, but that definitely helped define my passion for using like marketing, communications, and storytelling to actually make an impact and address important causes. So that's like the gist of my GW experience, I think, with a lot of twists and turns in the middle.
Right. No, the storytelling aspect, that's so critical, because I'm remembering back to the job I had before I went to start my master's here in Amsterdam, where One thing I read about with the kind of science literature on what makes effective charitable causes and things is they said statistics and numbers, it just kind of flies by people's heads. It doesn't really stick that well. But if you tell a compelling story, there's a thing called the identifiable victim effect. So if you focus on, say, just one person or one child versus
Right.
many, that can have a more powerful effect. Now with things though like virtual reality, that creates a whole new window of opportunities and things like that.
Yeah. I mean,
So
and
yeah.
I'll just say, like, commenting on that, one thing that I think is so interesting is that because, like, in the past couple of years, I've done some work with virtual reality. Like, I haven't produced any virtual reality films myself, but I've, in my work at Second Muse, working with an amazing person, but her name's Devar Ardalan, and she came from 22 years at NPR, so more audio storytelling, and she was really interested in how you could use virtual reality and artificial intelligence. So now, she's left Second Muse, has her own company called iVow that's focused on artificial intelligence. iVow stands for Intelligent Voices of Wisdom. So you can really get a sense of, like, how deep Devar is. And I've really loved her, like, mentorship over the years. But like, one thing is, like, the virtual reality and artificial intelligence is key. But at the same time, I was just at this climate reality project training, and there were 2,200 people who were there. It was by no means exclusive. It was their largest training yet. And like, there are 2,200 passionate people in this room from all over the world. I think they might have said like 40 countries in this room. And also, I could tell you that there are 82 climate reality projects chapters in the US or something, again, off the top of my head. So I was just amazed that there was nothing to capture and tell the stories of the people who were there in the room. Like, I don't know, and I'm going to suggest this at some point, but like, they should set up like a booth where people could just go and like record short 5-minute videos to talk about why they're there, because that's what people relate to. Everyone knows that. We agree that. We said that at the training, but we weren't actually doing it. So, I mean, rather than the virtual reality and all that, I want people to at least embrace like the basics of using video, which is why like 180 Degrees of Impact is video, or using audio or something that captures like the essence of what's happening beyond just photos and like live streams of important, quote unquote, important people on stage,
Right. No, absolutely. Yeah. Hearing someone's voice or seeing someone's being than just reading text on a page or an image. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I know it must engage other parts of the brain, and that's such a huge difference.
Yeah.
No, yeah, I really love that. And so when did kind of the storytelling aspect in your life, when did that manifest? Was that soon after you graduated from GW? Did you have that kind of idea of storytelling while you were there? Like, how did that come to be?
So I think the marketing stuff for me started when I was in probably like middle school and high school. I started to see the importance of it, and it was because my dad, who had a home healthcare business, a local home healthcare franchise in our community, in West Orange and in our county, Essex County, and it's called Right at Home of Essex County. And like, basically his business was getting home health aides to seniors who would, of course, like, their families would pay for the service. And the reason my dad did it and opened that business in 2004 was because the year before, my grandmother, his mother, Sophia Scott, passed away due to Alzheimer's. And so before that, my dad was working in like tech companies like AT&T, and he worked at IBM at one point before that. And, I think he had this massive shift because, when his mother passed away, he was just really like, he's like, wow, I need to use my skills differently. I remember like distinctly having that conversation with my dad where I was like, that's weird. Like, you should do a tech company, like open a tech company. Don't start a home healthcare business. This was me when I was maybe like, 11 or something. Like, just not, kind of not loving change
Yeah.
at that point. Despite all the other changes going on in life for everyone around that age. And so, my dad opened his business, and, he went from working at like these different tech companies and having these like probably horrible hours where, he would get to work early, be there late, to then working in our town. And he had so much flexibility. And especially over the summers or nights after school, I would like, ride around with him as he would like take some of the caregivers to work, because a lot of them didn't have cars. And I would work there like all summer, every summer, pretty much until college, just kind of getting to know the business and like doing all sorts of things like leading caregiver orientations and all that. But the interesting thing is, again, this is a national company right at home, based in Nebraska. But like each owner of a franchise has their own story. And my dad's story, as I mentioned, was like my grandmother, his mother, having this excellent care from this caregiver named Patty, who was incredibly attentive. And so I think that like communicating his perspective mattered so much more to people. It wasn't just about the services. He came to realize that his personal narrative was actually what got people to really buy in the most. And so when I was doing these orientations, when I was like 14 and 15 years old for all these caregivers, I would always tell them about like why my dad started the business, and it really touched their hearts. And that's when I started to understand like, wow, this marketing and story stuff is so important, because that's actually what people care about. And when you get people to care, that's how you kind of get them to buy in and get on board and take action in one way, whether it's working with you or like paying for your service or, doing something on their own. So I think that's where the seeds were planted. The business stuff was really from seeing my dad run his business, but the marketing stuff was just from understanding how like crucial that story can be.
Yeah, no, that's really fascinating. And the care piece, yeah, so I can see now with your website, right, it's called letscare.com, and I've seen like how that message has really resonated with you, and the caring thing. Just looking, yeah, kind of progressing forward past college. So you had this experience, you had this beginning. What did you, or back then, I guess, when you were first coming out of GW, what did you envision to do with human storytelling, or what were your initial plans, and how did that, compare to what you ended up doing?
I had no clue.
Okay.
No, I kind of had a feeling that I wanted to do stuff that was like somehow good for the world, because, I mean, other than just doing something that's positive and it feels good to benefit people in the world in some way, like it felt good for me to do. It's altruism, really, and it's like, it's that feeling that you get when you're benefiting other people. And so I had that, and I'd experienced that before, and so I knew it felt good. So I wanted to do something like that, but I didn't know what careers actually existed to do that.
Yeah.
To be honest, I didn't know where I wanted to work, or what I wanted to do with my career exactly, and things sort of just fell into place. So, I mean, I mentioned being involved in students against sexual assault, and the person who founded that was a woman by the name of Emily Rosowski, who's 1 year older than me, graduated in 2013 at GW, and like Emily studied economics, and she ended up going started after college, after GW, working for an organization called Social Driver. And so at Social Driver, they focused on their digital agency focused on a lot of like social campaigns, but a lot of causes like education and healthcare and stuff like that. And so Emily was there about a year, and then she texted me around March of my senior year, and she said, hey, like we're looking for someone to start in like after graduation. Do you know anyone who's interested? And I texted her back and I said, me. And so I went through the interview process, and like thankfully that was actually the only interview I did. And I was hired, and then I ended up being there about 2 years. So, that was through someone who I happened to meet like my freshman year at GW. And again, things just kind of worked out because she knew I was in the business and marketing, like studies and all that. And she thought of me as someone who could be good to work with her as part of her team. And I worked with her for a while at Social Driver as a teammate. And so that was really incredible. But the other piece of it is that the same exact day, like you really can't make this up. There's so much like serendipity in life, which is another thing I'm grateful for. That same day, it was a Wednesday. I think it was like Wednesday, May 7th or May 8th, 2014. And that was the day that changed my life in so many ways because because of students against sexual assault, was being interviewed on NPR on a show that's no longer on called Tell Me More, which was hosted by Michelle Martin. And they canceled it later that year after like a long, successful run. But, I go into NPR studios in DC because they have a segment that's kind of like a panel on campus sexual assault. And so here I am in the studio that morning, and I'm talking with like Michelle Martin and these other panelists about campus sexual assault. Meanwhile, in the back of my head, I know that at noon that day, I have to get across town for a job interview at Social Driver. So I'm in the studio. We have our conversation. It's somewhere on the internet if anyone wants to listen, whatever. But we were there, and I end up walking out of the studio, and I met someone by the name of Devar Ardalan. And Devar, as I mentioned, ends up being my boss and manager at Second Muse about 2 years later because she hired me. And there's so many other details of like how we bonded over time between when we first met at NPR and when she left NPR and then hired me at Second Muse. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like you really can't make up the like serendipity, and right. That's why even now I don't know where I'll be in 5 years. Yeah. It'll probably just be like a series of circumstances that sort of leads me to wherever I'll be next, whether it's working for someone or whatever it might be. So that's like the long and short of it. There was nothing intentional about it at all. Yeah. I had no clue what I was trying to get done, but right. I did end up really loving. I mentioned loving GW. I really ended up loving my time at Social Driver. I loved working at Second Muse and like love it to the point that I also kind of founded this project, 180 Degrees of Impact, that is really similar to my work at Second Muse and just takes it that much further. Right. So yeah, that's kind of my story of how I ended up where I am, and it's crazy. Like I'm just thinking about it myself. It's really crazy.
Yeah,
you really how life will work out, and it's that's the fun part about it.
No, it's so true. I do the same thing with my life. Like if one specific day didn't happen, one specific choice, if I didn't meet this person at this place at this precise time, my life would be completely different, and that happens all the time. And it totally spooks me out. I know just like who I meet too. It's of course is the same way. I was just, for some reason, I was thinking one of my favorite movies is called Mr. Nobody, and they do a good job of exploring that, about like life choices. I don't know if you've ever heard of that movie, but he's just seeing different timelines of his life. You can see the future and the past and the present all at once. It's a bit of a mind fuck, but there's just the thing where there's like a train coming, and his mom is on the train, his dad is next to him, and he has to choose which parent he wants to be with, so he starts running, and then he chooses neither of them, and it creates this whole other timeline. Like it's a really mind blowing film. Like highly recommend checking it out. But in any case, yeah, that just like flashed into my mind. That thing is just like choices are everything. You never know where you'll end up. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just insane. I definitely want to know more about when you started 180 Degrees of Impact. How you chose, how do you choose your guests for that? I really love all those interviews you have on there. I really think it's something special. So I'd love to have an inside look at that a bit.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. It's like, as you said that, I mean, I'll be honest. I also think it's something special now because it's like, and I feel like it might be like, it might sound like a cocky thing to say that, but it's really not. It's like, I'm really in awe of it because, like, to give context, over the years, a lot of times I've had different projects that I've wanted to start, like actually probably around the same time of year. I came up with the idea of 180 Degrees of Impact, like later in the year, in November and December is when I started doing it. But like around that same time of year that in 2015, and in 2014, I had similar things that flashed into my mind and just never really ended up like bringing these projects to life for one reason or another. I just wasn't passionate enough about them, I think. And that's why I'm really like, this is really special to me because, well, one, just to talk about where it started. So I don't know what I was thinking, but so in I know what I was thinking when I started 180 Degrees of Impact, and I'll get back to that. But like when I went to Kenya.
Okay.
That's like the way to put it. So I did my write-in vote because this was November 2016. Did my write-in vote for the election. Made sure I voted. It's super important. Register to vote. Yeah. It's like democratic process and all that. So I voted, and then I booked a trip to Kenya to go to like visit my best friend Ryan, who was living there at the time, because I figured, who do I know in Kenya, and when else would I get to have this experience? And that was my first time in Africa, and it was like this awesome experience. And I really could barely afford it at the time, but I did it, and I'm so glad I did because I got to see something that was like beyond my scope of the world at the time. And since I've gone back and I visited Ethiopia again when Ryan was living there, and it's like the trip was impactful in itself, but the thing is, the day I left was actually election day. The day I left Kenya was election day. I had a flight out of Nairobi and then into Frankfurt, Germany, where I had the layover, and then back to DC. And when we were taking off, I was with Ryan and we were watching the news, and there was everything about the election. I think people were still like finishing voting at that time, or of course the tally was still going on. And so I get on the plane and I'm thinking a lot about the election because Ryan specifically was like telling me how worried and nervous he was about the result of the election and what that would mean. And even like just the fact that, you really don't know. And I think we see this a lot with our president, our current president, but, there's a lot of uncertainty. Like he wasn't sure if he would be able to even like get back into the US, like based on some of the things that who ended up being our president was saying. Yeah. And so like I'm on this flight, and like sometimes when you're on a flight, you have certain things downloaded on your phones, like listen to or occupy your time. And this was an overnight flight, so rather than like reading, I put on a podcast, and it was this show called Reply All, which is this really great podcast hosted by two guys, Alex Goldman and PJ Vogt. But the episode I downloaded was maybe 20 minutes, and it was about the White House Office of Presidential Correspondence and about like what they do and that whole process of people submitting either written letters or calling in the White House comment line. And I don't know why it didn't occur to me until I was sitting on that plane, but like I volunteered there when I was a sophomore at GW because it's in an undisclosed location, but like it's near GW and near the White House, obviously. So like I'm really listening to this because it hit me, and I was thinking to myself like, why in the world like have I never written in a letter to the White House? Like Barack Obama was still president at the time, and I'm thinking, why did I never write a letter to President Obama and submit that? So I pull up my computer and I'm on the plane and I type this letter, and I'm just thinking a lot about the election. And I actually published this as like the very first thing I posted on 108 Degrees of Impact on Let's Stop Care. But I said, you know, there's a quote from you that says that the most important office in a democracy is the office of president. Or sorry, wow, that's not true. That's no, the most important office in a democracy is the office of citizen. That's a big difference. Yeah. But I was really thinking about that, and he wrote that, and I wrote in this letter, like, regardless of what happens, you know, in this election, whether it's like Hillary Clinton winning or Donald Trump winning, like, I think I commit to using my role as citizen to make our world startups making the world a better place. And I just kind of felt like it's important to do that regardless of who's in office, and whether it's on the state or local or like national level or whatever. And so that thought was going through my head. Get off the plane. I'm in Frankfurt, sitting there, headphones in as they're talking about the election. I really didn't want to hear it because it sounded like pretty bleak news. And then they announced Trump winning. And basically on my flight from Germany to the US, I was just thinking about this idea of really embracing and showcasing the people who are making a positive difference rather than dwelling on like all of the negativity that I was seeing everywhere, because that's depressing. And we still see a lot of like the depressing stuff. I think, I mean, at this point, there's a lot of like, it's sad, but there's a lot of like humor in it because it's just like, so we live in such a ridiculous world at this point, and thankfully, a lot of the things that like President Trump aims to do just kind of fall flat because he doesn't, know the rules on things. But whatever. And not to get into that. But anyway, I kind of felt like I wanted to create a project, and I came up with the name 108 Degrees of Impact because it's this idea of people being angry, regardless of the sides of the spectrum that they're on politically. There are a lot of people who are angry or ignorant or just speaking out and tweeting. And I'm thinking, what does that actually do in the world? I don't care what your politics is. Like, I want you to actually aim to make a better world. And so that's what I decided to showcase. And so I started 108 Degrees of Impact. Again, I think about a week later, I bought the domain name Let's.care. I started writing blog posts and launched it on January 1st, 2017. And then I did like 20 written blog posts or so about different people. The very first was Barack Obama. Like, Oprah was one of the people I included in there. Like, there are a lot of really like interesting and like, inspiring, but also people that's really tough to reach in that. And then like in March 8th, 2017, my dad passed away. Like, he was sick for about a month before or so. And it turns out he had a rare form of leukemia, but it was all so sudden. Like, one of the healthiest people, going to the gym, like living a very active life, running his business, like got very sick suddenly and died. And for me, I went from like writing these posts about people to then really like realizing the complexity of and the stress of like writing about people. Because if I wanted to write about you, Thomas, like I mean, I feel like I could see myself doing it based on the fact that we've like had these different conversations. It would be from my perspective, but like there are so many people, or it's like I don't know enough about them, and I really want to do them justice in
Right.
like whatever I share about them. Also, like one thing I've realized is that like grief and mourning is like very it's like an isolating time in your life, an
Yeah.
isolating feeling. So I didn't realize this when I started doing the interviews for 180 Degrees of Impact in about July 2017. But I also feel like that was a way to just connect with people and like literally to hear from people and have these amazing, inspirational, motivational like conversations where like I'm learning about their lives and how they're making the world a better place. And so,
Mm.
yeah, again, while there's all this stuff out there, negativity out there in the world, like I could still sit down with someone like you and talk with you about how you're making the world a better place. And that gives me a positive feeling. And then the benefit of recording it is that I'm also able to share that and rewatch it and re-listen to it now with the podcast on like iTunes and Stitcher. And
Right.
so it's like
Yeah.
all this cool stuff that came out of that. But that's really the origin of it. And I really think I think I said it's bigger than me because I haven't stuck with something like this much. So far I'm about a third of the way through interviewing people. I've had about 30 hours of conversation so far, and my
Mm.
goal, I guess, just because I had this idea of 180 degrees, was to interview 180 people, and so yeah, my goal is to interview 180 people, and that includes the people who I wrote about in the beginning. So Barack Obama is on my list of people that I'd
Yeah.
love to interview one day, and I really feel like I can't stop until I like
You
have
gotta get that
like
interview.
open
Yeah.
others. And but the crazy thing is, I actually believe that I could I could do that. It's building. I've talked with like some amazing people, not
Mm.
just in terms of like position and job title and everything, because we talk way too much about that, but like people with some truly amazing hearts and
Yeah.
efforts and resolve and resilience and will. And yeah, it's like, I love, I don't know. I mentioned like grief as something that I still experience in so many different ways, and that I'm still so engaged with. And I think it's so important to mention it because when we were like in 180 Degrees of Impact, and it's the sort of thing that's like so stigmatized that I just like love to talk because I don't say anything around. And so yeah, and so I mentioned it on my conversations, and again, I don't know, it's so hard to describe, but it's bigger than me at this point, and I think that's cool. That's kind of it's like someone I interviewed. Her name's Tato Letsomo, and she does work in Botswana. I actually met her at Harvard at their social enterprise conference at the start of this year, and I decided to interview her, and she responded to my email, which is
Yeah.
a big thing because I've emailed so many people to connect with them. But I ask people at the end of each and every interview I do, like, if your life were a book or documentary, what would the title be and why? And I think she had such a great title, which was I Responded to the Call. And like,
Mm.
that's how I feel. I just kind of respond to the call. It's like just kind of going with the flow of what life is putting in front of me. I think that's a
Yeah.
major theme for me.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just that whole story. Um, Are there any specific interviews at 180 Degrees of Impact that really stand out or that change things, either with what you were seeing with the guest or in yourself and how you'd interview them? Like, yeah, what were some inflection points? The
Yeah. So some of those key points, you know, it's that's such a funny question because like all of my conversations are really distinct from
Mm.
one another, and like some are obviously better than others because I think when you have someone who really just leans into the conversation to like borrow from Sheryl Sandberg, and who's also like big on option B and like the grief community. I love Sheryl Sandberg. to lean in. Like, there are a lot of people who really lean into the conversation, I would say, and it gets really like raw, real, and inspiring.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love when people have been vulnerable with me and really just honest. And so some that come to mind, because there are really a lot. I ended up interviewing my friend Eric Dowds, who has an organization called Die Badass, and I mention Eric in like different interviews and stuff all the time because, like, I mean, he just texted me again yesterday, and we'll probably talk today or tomorrow at some point again. Like, we're in touch a lot, and he has type 1 diabetes, and he was diagnosed at the age of 16. We were in high school together, and we weren't really friends at the time. We just became friends really, actually, like, probably around the exact same time that I started 108 Degrees of Impact. But Eric, I was on a call with him, and I was on Zoom, and I said to him, "Hey, like, I want to interview you for 108 Degrees of Impact sometime." He said, "Sure, let's do it now." So, like, kind of like with you, actually, like, didn't send him any prompts or anything. Like, I just kind of, went through it and talked with him, and it was a very honest conversation and real and like not prepared or scripted in any way. And I love that, like, that there are people who are willing to be that real. I then there's so many great people, and I'm gonna shout them all out. Like, there's a woman named Regina Northhouse who I met thanks to Twitter, basically. And that's actually how I've met a lot of people. Because I know I mentioned Eric, I knew him in high school, but we hadn't really connected a lot until 108 Degrees of Impact. And then, Regina is someone who I saw on Twitter one day when I happened to be scrolling through, and I messaged her and I said, "Hey, like, it would be cool to interview you," because I saw she was the executive director of this organization called the Food Recovery Network, and she had some fire tweets going out, like, all this during this Twitter chat. She seemed awesome, and so we recorded our interview, and after that, Regina said, "Let me introduce you to like 5 different people who you should interview." So she introduced me to like her friend Vivian Luke, who is the executive director of an organization called Work, which formerly was called Team Tassi. She introduced me to Ian Rosenberger, who is like the co-founder of that organization that Vivian's in Work, but also he's the founder, of Work, and also of another organization called Thread International, doing work in Haiti. And he was also like a Survivor contestant, and I'm a big Survivor fan, so I didn't tell him that, but I was totally like, yeah, let me talk to this guy. And I actually snuck in to mention Survivor at the end, but he was a great conversation. I went to Denver in October 2017 at one point, just for fun, and I again emailed a bunch of people to set up conversations, and the one who I was able to set one up with, who made time for me, was this guy named Jose Silva, who is part of the Denver Latino Commission, and he invited me into his office for like my first in-person 108 Degrees of Impact interview, and we recorded there. And he was telling me all about his life story and like working with like underprivileged communities and being from one, and facing a lot of resentment in his life and getting past that and like turning the page, as he put it. So many memorable ones. I talked with my sister after that, my sister Lindsay Scott, who like went to college, graduated in the mid 2000s, and then she graduated with a degree in theater and computer science, became a model, like ended up being like the first Black Calvin Klein exclusive, was a Victoria's Secret model in their fashion show in 2009. On all these different news stories because she decided like she wants to still do app development, and people were like, could you be smart and have a brain, or could you be smart and be beautiful, could you be smart and have a brain if you're a model?
I love seeing how like some of the interviewers, it's like their brain would short circuit, like it's something that's like impossible, like something crap,
And so I had like a 45-minute conversation with my sister where I actually learned a lot more about her. So that's like some of the people, and that's just like in 2017. 2018 was like a ton of other people who I'm so thankful for, and I don't even know if I'll like if I could start to go into the specifics of them, because a lot of other people have been supportive and vulnerable and awesome to me. But I started to get my confidence in terms of 180 degrees of impact. And I ended up as I mentioned, at the Harvard Social Enterprise Conference doing some interviews with a couple of people. Mm-hmm. And that was cool to be there doing that in person. I went to Ethiopia, as mentioned, and then I did, an interview in person at the U.S. Embassy with someone who worked at USAID, the USAID program in Ethiopia. And I happened to do a presentation after that about like my work at Second Muse and 108 Degrees of Impact and storytelling, which was awesome. And then April, I dedicated the month to like sexual assault awareness. So I interviewed a number of people who are really awesome, including this one person, Delaney Henderson, who is like this awesome, like around our age, sexual assault advocate. She was in the Netflix original film Audrey and Daisy. And so, the list goes on and on. And I don't know, I'm just really thankful that people, again, have like given me that love and have taken time to have genuine conversations with me about like life and about why they do what they do. And, it's cool. It's cool to like have an excuse to meet and have these conversations and document them with cool people. For me, it's not about the views. I really don't care about the views. I want, number one, I have that conversation and I feel like I achieved my goal. And then I want anyone who's really interested to tune in.
Right.
Yes, I know a lot of people do, but yeah, that's kind of the story of it, the long story. You're the first person to get like the long story, but I mean, genuinely, I'm actually passionate about like the fact that I'm excited about the fact that I get to talk with like really awesome people. Like I mentioned, like the chat I had with you, but like the list goes on and on, and I'm really thankful for that.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely incredible. Besides Obama and Oprah and these other, incredible people you had in the beginning who you'd love to interview one day, who are some of your other dream guests if you could interview anybody?
I don't even think of them as like dream guests, to be honest. Like,
who are your next guests?
Yeah, no, it's that's a great question, and I don't really know who the next guests will be. I will say, I actually use this. I don't know why I'm getting so specific. I could just say a spreadsheet, but I'm using this website called Airtable to like. It's not like I'm not. This is not an ad. I swear. I use Airtable to like as a kind of a smart spreadsheet thing to like document the people I've interviewed. I added like the time codes for the different interviews, so I know how many hours I've had, and so that was cool. Right. But I also have added people who I'd love to talk with. And just to kind of name some off the top of my head, wow, this is high pressure, shouting them out. So, of course, there's like Barack Obama, there's Oprah. And actually, just to stop there for a second, the crazy thing about that is like living in DC, you have access to so many people who actually have access to these people. So it's not like 6 degrees of separation. Like, I mean, they're actually people who like kind of have a close line or link to some of these people. But
yeah, that's true.
Like Joe Biden is one I'd also love to talk with more on the sexual assault awareness stuff, because he's really an inspiration in terms of that. There's a famous writer, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who she's real. I think most people know of her TED Talk, "We Should All Be Feminists," but she's a huge inspiration. I'd love to talk with her. There are also some people who I just think seem really cool. Like there's this one podcast I listen to called the Brain Candy Podcast, and it's really like a mix of like some brain science and smart stuff, but also it's like these two women, Sarah Rice and Susie Meister, who are just like they were on MTV on like Real World and Road Rules and like
okay.
seem like they'd be really fun. But like Susie is a religious scholar, and like they're both massive feminists, but Susie is a religious scholar, and I think it'd be cool to talk to her about that. And then like Sarah is a sexual assault advocate, and I only actually ended up listening to the podcast after like meeting someone who was the founder of this organization called PAVE, Promoting Awareness Victim Empowerment, where I still do some of my sexual assault work. And so, yeah, there are a lot of people on my list, but those are just some off the top of my head. And I mean, the great news is I still have like about 120 people to interview. So I have a lot of options, a lot of opportunities and options. And like, there'll be a lot of people who come up along the way who I like see pop up on social media or who I hear of who I decide to interview. So yeah, I mean, I could go on and on about potential people for a long time. But actually, one thing I will say is that like one of the hardest parts for me is just that, you know, obviously you reach out, and I'm sure I know you've experienced this too, that you reach out a lot more than you like actually talk to people. So like, for instance, I can't even tell you how many times I've emailed different people and there's like no response, or they're too busy. And all I want is like an hour of their time or 30 minutes of their time. And but sometimes people don't have that to spare. And like there's this one person who's big deal around the 2016 election, and I met him before. His name is Van Jones, and he's like on CNN, and I think he has a show. He definitely has a show now and a book out there and everything. He's done a lot of climate activism, and so I've been in touch again and again with his like assistant, who said, you know what, now is not a good time for him. He has a show, so like, I imagine he has to wake up at like 3 a.m. every day, and probably has like 2 hours of sleep each night or something. But I mean, I'll keep trying. I realize that the thing I'm sticking with, the reason I'm sticking with it is because I love to do it. So, who knows? Maybe after this call, I'll send another email follow up to like his assistant and ask her if she thinks he'll have an hour. Maybe my persistence will pay off.
Yeah.
I hope it will, because I'm not stopping until I talk with Barack.
Yes, Obama.
Let me just say, what a man.
Yeah, I know. Oh, just every interview I've seen with him. And also, I love, I think, what was it? Maybe it was 2 years ago, I saw that he had a LinkedIn profile, and it wasn't like just someone who like, and it was like very detailed too. And I had clicked add on it or whatever. I didn't get a response, but I took a picture of his work experience. I just found that in and of itself so inspirational, where if you juxtapose that with other presidents, where it's like he was just such an academic. He was so brilliant at Harvard, and he was magna cum laude, and he was a lecturer, professor for like 10 years. And then he did some, great work in community service and as a politician, but it was like just pure ascendance. I mean, I can't think of a faster trajectory path to that. And
like, the one thing I'll say about that, though, that's so funny is that you mentioned that, and I think it's so important just to state that, like, while I think that's so cool, and I think oftentimes we categorize people by like their job titles and positions and all that. So even in a conversation I was having recently with this like awesome public speaker, and this guy named Taylor Conroy, like, he's had like numerous startups that like have done social impact kind of work, but then they kind of, for one reason or another, he shut them down, or like they failed in one way or another. And he's really, so in talking with him, there are a couple things that I want to mention. One is like, I remember early on in the call, I mentioned the fact that I knew like he's had so many careers. I called him like the most interesting man in the world because he had a career as a firefighter. He was a real estate person. He like helped build multiple schools overseas, in particular in Africa, in different countries. And I'm talking with him, and he's saying like, you know what, like, while all these titles are important, that's not who I am. I'm someone who's like, as some of my experiences. And so Taylor was awesome, but he just reminded me that like sometimes we do focus a lot on like titles, like they're the like manager or CEO or founder or whatever, and it's like, you know, a lot of people are doing awesome stuff and they're not the founder or CEO, and they're like, and I think when we open up our minds beyond that, we also like just considering the lack of diversity oftentimes among like for instance the Fortune 500 CEOs, to give that example, like we realize there are a lot of other people from diverse backgrounds that like have a ton of things to contribute. Like, to be honest, one of my problems with the climate reality training is like that I just went to this week. Al Gore was there, and of course he is a white man, and like that, it is what it is. He founded the project, and I think he like mostly white guys, and like, you know, founders and like rich people, and it's like, how am I supposed to relate to these people who have all these resources in the world? And like, you know, I couldn't. The panel that I related most to was like all these people that were they were doing work in like the LA area and in the community and otherwise, and like coming from all these different backgrounds, and they got multiple standing ovations. And I don't think that's an accident. You know, we do overlook sometimes the people who have the most to contribute and the best way of communicating. Like, I was like not crying, but like my eyes were just welling up with tears, like as I was listening to this, because I'm thinking like, this is what I needed to hear. And, you know, we just need to keep our ears and eyes open. And so sometimes I do interview people who I'm like, I'm not exactly sure like what I'll get from them or what I'll hear from them, but I think it's important to be open to, you know, not just talking to like the head of a company, but to talk with people who have those diverse experiences.
Yeah, no, I think that's really awesome. I was just thinking, there's like two ways where you're losing out on communication. If you're focusing too much on people or the head or CEO or whatever, you lose sight of everyone else. But also, if you put someone on a pedestal and you just see them as their credentials, you make it that much harder to communicate with them. Like, I forget who said it, but there's a quote I liked. It's like, if you put someone on a pedestal, you're forcing them to look down on you. And like, I really like that, you know. And obviously, you're not going to have any kind of constructive conversation or insight with that kind of dynamic. So I thought that was, you know, that's really interesting. And you know, I just think it'd be so incredible also to interview Obama now that he's not in the White House, you know, and he's just had this life since then that has been, of course, out of the spotlight, and it'd be great to see what he's doing, you know. I mean, I know on paper some things he's doing, but like really how his day life has changed, you know.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't even really want to know about that, like, because like, I mean, it's out there, right? And I like to, one thing I like take pride in is that I really like to like at least become familiar with what the person's doing to an extent, or to a deep extent, so that I'm not asking them questions that they've been asked. Like, but also, more importantly, I don't really care that much about the what as much as like the why. So I feel like there are a lot of questions he's kind of been asked, but there are actually kind of some questions that I don't know if he's really gotten into, like some of the deep. Why do you decide to put yourself through like all of this pain and like that people, or this grief that people give you, you know, for all of that you are and that you're doing? And, you know, obviously he's someone who's been probably interviewed and featured and documented more than anyone else, but I would really like to go there and get that perspective from him today. You know, I don't need to know. I don't even want to go into the policy of it. It's just for me. And I wrote this in the letter that I wrote to the White House. And by the way, of course, I got like the stock response. It's like, thank you for supporting the president. It's from him, but like, you know, thank you for supporting me. I believe in you, all that stuff. No, it was just interesting because I wrote about like the fact that like beyond just his politics, like forget all of that. Like I love that he is such like a strong representative of the Black community. I love that he is so inclusive and like I mean, in so many ways, I guess you could take that in a lot of directions, but like such like standing up so much for LGBT rights and like standing up so much for different like I don't know different identities and people and like I just love that about him. Like I legitimately like love what he does, and I had the honor of like at one point I maybe it was like 2012 or something shaking his hand and when I was at GW and like that I lost it like there's a video out there me like President Obama but I was yeah it's really embarrassing but it was like it show how much like personal impact he has on people, so I would want to get into that. That's what I want to get into for everyone I talk with and feature. Like it's not about what you're doing, it's about who you are, and I want people to look at the people I talk with and see themselves in those people. That's really my goal.
No, it's a beautiful goal. And especially because you get such a diversity of people too. Just to show that we all have this unity. We're all part of the human race. It's it's really important. Another thing I was just thinking of is, did you get for how you conduct your interviews at 180 Degrees of Impact? Like, did any particular interviewers, anything you had observed, help inspire like how you conduct that, or the questions you ask, or was it more just kind of off the cuff or self-created?
I mentioned earlier on that I was considering like studying journalism at GW, and I'm really glad I didn't, because I don't think I ever really, there's a lot of like a grind and like a path that you need to accomplish to become a journalist, and I don't think that would have worked for me. But I always I always admired really great questions, but I also admired like how the interviewers not only ask questions but interact with people. So just to name people that come to mind, I remember there was a point where I really was like, wow, like Diane Sawyer I really like how she asks questions. I like Katie Couric's approach. Love Robin Roberts, who's another one. She's on Good Morning America, and she's one who I definitely want to interview because I wrote about her early on, and like such an inspiration who brings her experience and like different her to the table in some of these conversations. And so that I don't know, I feel like I just picked up on a lot of these things over time. And the strange thing to me is that my very first conversation was with this guy Tim Yoon, who had met one time about a year before or so, and Tim is a very friendly guy, and he's very outgoing, and so I knew like no matter what, this is going to be an interesting conversation, a good one to start with. And so I mean, my questions really haven't changed from that very first interview. Like, for some reason I came up with the last question about the book or documentary, and that stuck. And so I don't know. I just feel comfortable with it, and I feel like I get a certain level of depth with the conversations I ask. And honestly, it's not super structured. I don't write out the questions before. I don't send people exact questions before. I do say to them, just like think about these things. Think about some of the specific stories that you have. Think about like why you do the work you do. Think about what your vision is for what you want to do. Think about what the title might be to your like real life book or documentary. And then I've gotten some really great answers, and I've had some really deep conversations because of it.
Yeah. And no, I would love to just flip that question that you ask everyone else though. I mean, what is your what would your book or life documentary's title be? Mascot.
You know what? It's funny. I mentioned Regina Northhouse, who is from the Food Recovery Network, and again, she was one of my like probably first 10 interviews, and she did that to me about exactly a year ago. She's like, what do you think? What's your book or documentary? And because it's really a conversation. And I told her, and I tell everyone, like, if you have a question for me, like, just throw it out there in this, and I'll answer it, and we'll talk through it. It's cool. And so, I think what I told her, which has changed, I think, a lot. And this was also like 5 months, I think, after my dad passed away. But it's still like really numb. It's still something I deal with, which I think I want to point out, like, you don't really get over grief and loss. So at the time, I think I told her something that came to mind for me before, which was like the idea of the courage to live. Like, I think one thing I've realized through 180 Degrees of Impact, that it really takes courage, which I have tattooed on my wrist. It takes courage to live, and to like live your best life, and to put yourself out there, and to live life to the fullest. So that was what I think I told her. But I don't know. It's, it's tough. It's tough. There's a lot of, maybe I would call it, let me put it like this. There would, in my hope, there'd be like multiple books. Maybe I would just call it 180 Degrees of Impact and be boring, but like I would like want to put in, I don't know, I want something that, I think I want to really communicate like my journey talking with all these people and what I've learned. And I don't know. I don't have one, because I feel like I've been so influenced by all the titles that I've been told. Like one person who I was talking with earlier this year, her title was 180 Puzzle Pieces of Me, which like she took from based off of my conversations, And I'll tell you, just the other day, or a couple of weeks ago, really, in thinking about all the conversations I had, I actually like I printed out all of the names of the conversations on pieces of paper, and I stuck them on the wall in my apartment. And it was just mind blowing to see like about 50 pieces of paper with like all these different titles of like books and documentaries that people would have. And maybe my title would be something about that, like just documenting people's real life books and documentaries and sharing that. That's a great question, though. I don't know. It's tough. And also, I'm now trying to think of what your title was. I could like picture it in my head because I was staring at it. But it's one that like inspired me too. Oh man, I'm blanking on it.
I think it was like, how can I help you? Or something.
Yes,
like
it was how can I help you? So I don't know. It's tough when like I feel like a lot of my story is. Again, I feel like I love going back to that theme of love, where, I would imagine that book or documentary is going to be something that's full of gratitude, and like me just reflecting on like how much like the people around me have helped build who I am now. And so, I don't know. We'll see what that'll be one day. But until then, I'll just keep putting out other stuff. And, my plan is to put out, like I mentioned, now it's on like the podcast app as an example. I already have this project on the website, so there's that documentation there and that story being told already. But I would love to do a book at some point, just with learnings, whether it's at the end of my project or somewhere along the way. So we'll see. I mean, people should just stay tuned to figure out about that. But if anyone has any ideas for me, or if like you have any ideas for me on that title, let me know, because that's a great question. And not to pat myself on the back because I came up with it,
right.
NBD, no big deal.
Yeah.
But that would be, I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
I think it'll come to me one day in a conversation. I think I would imagine that just the way that I work and like a lot of things will come up, I bet someone's going to give me a suggestion one day, and I'll kind of go from there. Or it'll be something in a conversation. My whole life, I feel like, especially my career, has been so organic that it's going to be organic. I realize I can't plan these things. So that's probably why I'm struggling so much to come up with a title realistically.
Yeah, no, it's funny. What you're going through right now is the same thing that happens to me if somebody asks me like what my favorite book is. Like it's just always changing, and I get like this some distinct pleasure every time I open a new book and see something in it all the time. Like this is my favorite book. No, this is my favorite book. This is my favorite book.
Yeah.
And so like to just pick one, it's like why?
Yeah, I know. I mean, the difference is, I guess, like I feel like you could always name a different book. Like if you're not, if you're okay with not being tied to a certain title, like you have a number of options. Whereas like, but like, whereas like the list of books that you could potentially read, like if someone asks you what you want to read, that's like those options are actually limitless pretty much, you know, like there's no way you could read every book in the world. And so that's how I feel about coming up with the title. Like my options are limitless and I don't like to tie myself down to something. So I mean there is the courage to live idea and maybe I'll stick with that, but we'll see. It'll come to me. Like maybe it'll come to me in like a dream or something, and I'll like divine intervention or whatever you want to call it. But you'll know as soon as I know, probably.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's beautiful. A question I always like to end with, although it might require a lot of thought or just thinking, is like, what's the most memorable words of advice you've ever received? It could be from anybody at any time in your life. Um, yeah, whatever stands out.
You know what? That's tough, and that's really tough. But I have an answer,
Okay.
and because something pretty immediately came to mind. So, I mean, I feel like through 180 Degrees of Impact, I'm just constantly getting advice from people and asking them that question and asking them for like what advice they would share with people who want to create things and kind of be like them in a sense. But you know what? So this is such a like a. I talk about serendipity and I talk about like there are a lot of crazy things in life. So this is going to be my long answer getting to my point, my piece of advice. Like I've just had a lot of strange coincidences in life. Like there's this guy named Billy Ward who I have to interview. He was actually, I met him my freshman year of high school. He works at the place where I went to high school, and he's like a guidance counselor, but also has such an inspirational message about love and be loved. It's like that's his whole thing. And actually, my senior year at GW, I don't know why I even thought of him. Like I don't know why he came up, but like I thought like I should nominate him to do a TEDx talk at TEDx Foggy Bottom, which is like a large TEDx event with probably like 1,000 people each year. So I nominated him, and he ended up giving this talk, and the date I think was like February 7th, 2014. And he was on stage because I'm like, I need to see his talk because I'd heard him give this talk on love and be loved before when I was in high school. He'd given the talk a number of times, and each time it was so emotional. And it's this talk about how, you know, he went to Georgetown University, but he wanted to play for the NFL. So he was like drafted by the Baltimore Ravens, and he like was cut like the day before the start of the season. So he didn't actually get to play in like the actual season. He played in the preseason, but he was cut, and he had to figure out what to do with his life. So he decided to become a teacher in high school, and he started working at Seton Hall Prep, where I went. And he met this kid named Daniel, who was one of his students in this class. And Daniel was like this little kid. As you can imagine, Billy Ward is like this massive guy, or like a pretty big guy, having like been in the NFL. You can kind of imagine his stature. But he had this like kid Daniel in his class, and Daniel was like a small guy, but like everyone in the school knew him and loved him. And you know, long story short, without getting into that, like on February 7th, 2014, it turned out to be like the 11th anniversary of when Daniel passed away. Like that exact day that the TED Talk happened was that day. And like I've had lots of serendipitous moments. Like my flight here, I switched seats and ended up sitting next to like my mentor for the Climate Reality Project, who like we had a 2.5 hour conversation on the flight here, which made that flight a lot easier. So like, you never know what life will hand you. And that leads to my advice that like actually came from my dad. And the reason I get to the serendipity is that like, I mean, I of course did not know that he would die on, March 8th, 2018 or 2017. I knew that it was coming at that point. For about a month, but like if you asked me 2 months before, I wouldn't have no clue. Right. And it turns out that sometime in 2015, I actually recorded a conversation with him, an interview with him about his early life. And my goal was to do like numerous interviews to help him write a book about his life. And I would tell him like, you need to write a book about your life, whatever. And actually on the 1-year anniversary of his death this year, I ended up posting it on 108 Degrees of Impact and listening to it. And it's a 45-minute conversation where I'm talking with him about his life. And, the one piece of advice that he gave was like, you need to learn to make lemons out of lemonade. And that wasn't just specific to me, but for him. He grew up in like civil rights era Virginia in a county called Prince Edward County, where like this was the only place in American history, especially at that time, where they shut down the schools because of like racial tensions. And like they didn't want to integrate. So the schools shut down for 5 years. And so lots of people like didn't receive like the rest of their education because school just ended for them at that time. They ended up working instead and never completed their education. My dad instead had to move away from, he moved away from Virginia when like his mom, Sophia, gave him the opportunity and said, do you want to go live with like the Quakers or like the American Friend Service, as people, some people know them. And so he moved from Virginia away from home to like New Jersey and then to Massachusetts to live with people, including like a family of like Holocaust survivors. And like, so, he never had an easy life in any way. But he always had to learn to make lemons out of lemonade. And it's like, for him in so many ways, I felt like he was the most chill person because it's like, everything's like water off a duck's back, It's like, hey, that's life. Like, it happens. Sometimes it's not great, but like, right. You have to make the best out of it. So that's a long way of saying that, life throws a lot of interesting things at you. Sometimes they're really tough. Sometimes they're really like exciting, and there's that serendipity there, and you can't believe that like coincidences like that exist. But no matter what, you need to make the most of it. And that's my advice: make lemons out of lemonade. I don't think I would take that title from my dad because I consider that his title of his book or documentary. But right. Who knows? Maybe that would be.
Yeah, no, that's really beautiful. Thank you. Well, Matt, thank you for coming on the Roundtable Chats podcast. It's been a real pleasure to interview you, pick your brains, hear your life story and everything. It's absolutely fascinating. No,
wait, hold on. See, I'm gonna do something. I'm gonna pull something right now that people do to me sometimes, like to ask you, like, what's your best piece of advice at this point after all these conversations? I mean, this is episode 10. It's a milestone. I'm wondering, like, for you, which, by the way, I want to point out, you have like such long conversations that I don't know what the math is, but like I've had 30 hours of conversations and you're like pretty close to that.
So, maybe. I don't know. I haven't been keeping track, but yes, they can be quite long. I think my longest like 2 hours and 40 minutes. That
might have been your first one.
Yeah.
Which I was telling you I listened to when I was in Ethiopia, right, where I had horrible internet.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I'm wondering from you, and for anyone who's like listening to this, like, what advice do you have after based on these 10 conversations?
Yeah, well, I guess one piece of advice is not to have expectations at all, if possible. I try to kind of go into each interview with a blank slate. I noticed in the past with some guests I had who were friends who I had for a while, I might expect or even project sometimes where I want it to go. And like, I think
Yeah.
that's a terrible way to go about it. It's much better to be very present, and observing what they're bringing to the table and then going with that, kind of like being water. That would be the big piece of
Yeah.
advice I would have with that kind of stuff. And that applies to life in general. I think you'll be much better off. A lot of disappointment just comes to going to a certain arena, a class, a school, a party, an interview, whatever, thinking it'll go one way and then it's going nowhere near there, or just going a completely different path. Much better to just have kind of an open mind with anything.
I mean, the one thing I'll just say to that is that, like, and I've learned this, like, I had a conversation with my mom at one point when I went up to Harvard for the social enterprise conference, and my mom, actually, something I didn't mention, my mom actually took me and my older brother to the conference in like 2009. So that's when I started to get exposed to social enterprise, which I think has a lot to do with like why I'm even more interested in that work now. But, I managed to go with her this year, and I got her to kind of meet me up in Boston. And that was really amazing to spend that time with her. But we were talking about some of the conversations I had. And she said, you know what, like, I won't name names, but like, I won't name names. She did. She's like, that conversation that you had with so-and-so, like, they just, like, they think they know everything. This one person thinks they know everything. And she loves, like, a lot of the conversations, and a lot of them really resonate with her. But, like, she's like, that person thinks they know everything. And, like, they come from such, like, their perspective comes from, like, such an entitled perspective. And, like, I was like, you know what? Now that you mention it, like, I hadn't really thought about it, but, like, yeah, I get what you're saying. And I kind of came to the realization that, like, for me and maybe even for you, we're in the kind of like the business that we ask people questions and you give them the room to respond. And like, they either kind of sink or they swim or like they, splash around in the middle or whatever happens. But like, you kind of just give people the space to respond and tell their own story and write their own real life book or documentary. And like, hey, not everyone's is going to be as exciting or interesting or as informed as the next person's. Like, I could tell you the couple people that she was referring to, I then would contrast them with like, I talked with Tata Litsomo, who she works with an organization, Young Love, and she literally was coming to the U.S. for the first time. That was her first visit to the U.S. in Boston, and I guess I was like the first person she actually met and spoke with, and like the contrast of that depth of her experience in Botswana, talking with like 50,000 kids about like HIV and AIDS is a lot different than some of the other people I've talked with. And like, she loved that conversation. And like, she met Tato because my mom was there at the conference. And like, yeah, you kind of just give people space to share who they are. And like, not every conversation is going to be awesome. But to be like as authentic as possible about it. I'm hoping anyone who's listening appreciates that. And yeah, I mean, like, I don't know how, like, I'll hand it back over to you to like wrap up and like tell me and ask any final questions. But of course, like, if anyone's listening at this point and wants to get in touch, by the way, I should totally post this on my podcast as like a bonus episode or something.
Yeah, you should.
Yeah, like if anyone's listening, like they could easily reach me at like my email, hello@lets.care, or just go to lets.care, which is the website for 180 Degrees of Impact. Like on the podcast app, one thing I realized is that like the degrees, if you search 180 Degrees of Impact, it's so hard to come up. So like,
okay.
I would say just go to the website and I link to like Stitcher and to like iTunes where you can see the podcast and all that. Or you could search Matt Scott Impact. It'll come up later. Yeah. That's cool. So I don't know. That's kind of like where, I don't know. I want people to join me on the journey and get involved. Yeah. I could ask them questions and let them sink or swim and everything. So yeah, that's kind of I just wanted to jump in and say that because you never asked me to say it.
Yeah, and I'll definitely include that all in the description of this video and all that stuff when I post it. But I was just thinking, yeah, with what you said, like I think one of like the most enriching things about doing these episodes and these podcasts is like I never know where it's gonna go. I might ask some similar questions with like, each guest, but they've been all completely distinct, and I love that I don't know where it goes, and that's how I feel about life in general. Like I think it would be awful if you can predict the future and you just see every twist and turn when it comes, even the bad ones. But and I was just thinking with what you mentioned earlier. The person who thought they knew everything when they're speaking, like if you knew that's how they're going to be before you did the podcast and you had to do it anyways, that would make the experience that much worse, right?
Yeah.
Like if you knew ahead of time.
I mean, I agree. No, I agree completely. And I mean, I've had times where I've like not done, I've for like only a couple times where I've like actually canceled an interview where I was like, I don't think I'm vibing with this person. Like I view it as a conversation and there's a bond there with the people I talk with, and there needs to be. It's authentic. And so sometimes I just won't have those conversations. But I guess like the one thing I'll add is like, if in case it's not clear, like I feel like I've had a ton of really cool experiences in life and work and all that. Like, and I won't even go into them because like look at my LinkedIn page, whatever, I put stuff out there, but like, if you really want to see it, you really don't need to see it. Like, it's not that important. But what I'm trying to say is like, I mentioned the grief stuff and in general, I just want people to know, like, it's okay to be far from perfect or like not know what you want to accomplish. And I don't know, this is fun. I'm glad that you do these longer conversations because it really made me think a lot about a lot of things that I haven't thought about. So this is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Roundtable Pets. I hope there are 100 more episodes, or at least 10 more episodes.
Yeah, no, I plan to keep doing it. I'm curious to see what kind of guests I can get now I'm in Amsterdam. I can definitely get close to my goal of trying to talk to someone from each country. That's like a lifetime goal. But yeah, one at a time. I can't believe I already did 10. This was a perfect episode for the 10th anniversary. But yeah, really, thank you for everything, man. I really appreciate it.
It's a lot of fun. Cool stuff. And I mean, if anyone's listening right now, I would just tell them to like tweet me or something, or like add me on LinkedIn and let me know that they're hearing my voice at this point. Because I don't know, I just appreciate anyone who, like, I know you would do too, of course, like anyone who takes the time to actually listen and kind of be part of this, because we're just talking, like, right. Again, it doesn't even matter who listens. It's just like cool that we have this like deep, like almost 2 hour conversation, which I think doesn't happen enough. And as people have said to me, like, we need more conversation in the world. So that's what I'll say. I feel like I could keep going on and on. We could probably talk forever, but like, you have time limits, and it also would take longer the longer we go on, the longer it takes to upload. And I don't know how your Wi-Fi speed is doing, but like, I don't want you to have to spend like 3 days uploading this. So.
All right. Yeah. No, I think that's a great way to end it. Yeah, I know. I was just going to add to that, just saying, like, I've always been curious, who's listening as well. I know some of my friends are regular listeners, but, yeah. That'll be cool. This will be forever documented.
It's awesome. Yeah, we'll figure out some other times to do this. Damn, this is cool. Do you have any closing? I feel like you probably have like some closing stuff you say, or you don't. You don't say. I think you should have some.
I think I should have some closing thing. I'll have to think about that more. What that is.
This is my legacy on the.
See on the flip. No, I think after the first one I did.
I'm trying to make sure have some sort of closing that you can now for the next 100 episodes that you do.
Well, I remember the first one when it lasted a while and I had a person with me in person. I said, like, go outside, go get some fresh air now, to the listener, if they've been listening this long.
Say it again. I say keep impacting, but so I'm going to say for anyone who's watching or listening, keep impacting. And then you could say your catchphrase.
No. I'm not good with catchphrases. I have to think of something.
So I'll do it for you.
Okay.
Go out in nature, get some fresh air, take a walk, bond with people, have conversation, have a good time. I feel like that's what you would say.
Yeah. No, that sounds good. Yeah.
Cool stuff.
Challenge yourself. Have hard, difficult conversations. Get to know somebody. Go on a deeper level. It's very enriching. Yeah.
And where people, if they don't already know, where could they listen to the Roundtable Chats?
They can always find this at roundtablechats.com or on my Instagram, Pure Thomas. I also post them all. But if they're listening to this, they'll know that, yeah, as well. But yeah, I think that wraps it up.
Cool. Did it. Thank you. Keep impacting.
Yes.